Once upon a time, so long ago that the names of those who lived the tale have been lost to the passage of time, there lived a very poor shoemaker and his wife, who had only a small bit of leather left with which to cut one final pair of shoes. After the pieces were laid out to be assembled, the weary man decided to say his prayers, putting his fate in God's hands, and along with his good wife, went off to sleep. When the two awoke, they found an exquisite pair of leather shoes perched on their work desk, where they had left the cut pieces of leather the night before. A man came into the shop that day and, seeing the shoes, fell in love with the craftsmanship and paid more than their price, leaving happily with the purchase tucked beneath his arm. The bemused couple rejoiced with new leather to work with, so they cut the pieces for another pair of shoes and went off to bed, awakening the following morning to an even more stunning pair of shoes that sold once again for a much higher amount than they anticipated. This pattern was repeated over and over again over the course of time until the shoemaker and his wife were quite wealthy. Just before Christmas, the two decided to try and stay awake through the night to catch whoever had been making the beautiful shoes for them, restoring their fortunes. From a dark corner of the room where they hid, they witnessed two small elves who were in an appalling state of undress. Diligently, the little elves worked through the night until they completed the shoes before running off. The shoemaker's wife declared that she ought to make them full suits of clothing to thank the little men for all the work they had been doing, which had made the couple so wealthy. The shoemaker agreed and made two small pairs of shoes to go with the suits of clothing. When the elves arrived that night to work, they discovered the gifts of clothes and shoes and delightedly put them on. According to the brothers Grimm, the elves did not return after that night, but the shoemaker and his wife continued to sell fine shoes and live quite comfortably, greatly refreshed by the help they had received. When the brothers related the story of the elves, publishing it in their Children's and Household Tales book in December of 1812, it was the first time that the mischievous little mythological creatures had been tied to Christmas and credited in writing with positive qualities. Previous to the tale being circulated, the legendary Elves, or hidden folk of Norse mythology, were thought to live in the invisible realm between the worlds, where they popped in and out of anecdotes across pre-Christian European traditions. In various countries, they were called by different names, but their character was firmly agreed upon across all. They were impish in nature, helpful around the house if respected, and if not, quick to create mischief and wreak havoc. In Scotland, they were known as the Brownies, who happily dusted your windowsills just out of your reach, or cleaned up the corners that were overlooked, but just as quickly they might steal tools and break furniture if they were so inclined. In Germany, they were called kobolds, and were known as household spirits, who, when not fed properly, would just as soon kick you over when you bend down to pick things up or hide your best farm tools, as give you any good luck or make your bed for you. Hangry elves are nothing to be trifled with. And you must simply live at the whim of the little creatures who are conveniently invisible, and thus difficult to hold to account. I'm beginning to think I may be acquainted with an elf or two. In the Scandinavian lore, the tomta, which means homestead man, with their pointed hats, long fluffy white beards, and ragged clothes, were believed to be ancestral spirits who stayed just out of sight while caring for the children, animals, and the property they inhabited. For all their hard work, these gnomes, who were half the size of a grown man, asked only to be respected, and occasionally fed a large bowl of porridge with a healthy chunk of butter nestled on top. If one was to be heard cursing or withholding the butter from their porridge, very bad things were likely to transpire. Again, I have the strange feeling I've met a few of these industrious little men, or perhaps just seen their handiwork. I suspect that somewhere, perhaps Finland, there's an enormous repository of singular socks, minus their matches. Next to a mountain of forks, the children around the world have assured their parents they had no hand in losing, all watched over by a disgruntled and probably hungry gnome. But I digress. Despite these vindictive little creatures being associated with the winter solstice in Nordic mythology, nowhere was there any mention of their employment at the North Pole or their relationship to the big man himself. Until in 1823, Clement Clarke Moore described St. Nicholas as a jolly old elf in his poem "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," and the public got the first inkling that St. Nicholas might be an elf. Even then, there was no indication that he had a chapter of the Union of Elfish Persons working away at his workshop, preparing toys for boys and girls. And even though Louisa May Alcott, of Little Women fame, is often credited for enlightening the world on the ways of the Christmas elf through her manuscript of the same name, filled with short stories of their exploits, this is a difficult assertion to prove, as it was never published and over time has been lost entirely. Thus it was that in 1857, when Harper's Weekly published a poem titled "The Wonders of Santa Claus," folks got their first real peek into the workshop of the jolly old elf and found elves working with all their might to make a million pretty things, cakes, sugar plums, and toys to fill stockings hung up, by the little girls and boys. Children everywhere were captivated by the image of the magical toy-making elves. By the beginning of the 20th century, every adult had grown up with the concept of the industrious little Christmas elf, and every child knew it to be as factual as spring following winter. Walt Disney affirmed it in 1932 with his short animated film, with eager children peering behind the Christmas curtain to see Santa busily working with his elves. Norman Rockwell dipped his brush in a bit of red paint and splashed the images of Santa and his merry band of small folk across canvases to the delight of, everyone. In 1964, the Rankin-Bass television special featuring Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and the two Natalie-dressed elves became an instant holiday classic, which filled in our image of the miniature folk who populated the North Pole. Their distinctive pointy hats, fur-trimmed coats, tights, and gold-buckled belts were indelibly stamped on the imaginations of our culture through that General Electric Christmas film about a little reindeer with a special gift. And when Buddy the Elf delightfully sprang to life in his own 2003 live-action motion picture, the production team for the film was required to obtain legal permission to model their costumes after it. From unpleasant, invisible little creatures with conspicuous attitude problems to lovable, altruistic miniature folk beloved the world over, now that's some expert-level rebranding that every politician wishes they could pull off. And all they need is a couple hundred years, some talented writers, the complete faith of the world's children, and a boss who distributes their handmade gifts to everyone. Piece of holiday cake. We hope you've enjoyed today's video and that you'll come back tomorrow for day 14 of our Christmas countdown. If you could take a moment and click the little button, comment, and even share the video, we greatly appreciate it, as it all helps us continue to grow. Now go throw away all those socks you've been holding on to just in case you run across their match. Unless you're on your way to Finland, you're straight up out of luck. We'll see you tomorrow.